The path of least resistance, the status quo, is stay inside. It's comfortable.
Status quo is not your friend. Eliminate the ceilings. I'm not saying it's easy, but you're a force in nature. Don't let the external folks stop your force in nature. And nobody can put a ceiling on your life unless you allow them.
Spartans, listen up.
We need to sleep better. So how do you sleep better? Never thought about it before. And so I met Jack, I met Essentia. Pay attention to the mattress you sleep on because it's loaded with chemicals.
Recovery, cooling, and pressure relief, all in one mattress. Up to 60% more deep and REM sleep. Less inflammation, faster bounce back. No toxins, no EMFs, no BS.
My buddy Jack over at Essentia, he's kind enough to give us a code for the Spartan community. That's DECA, that's Tough Mudder, all of us. Use Spartan25, get a discount. Prioritize your sleep so you can sleep faster, you can do more burpees, you can train more, you can get healthier. When you sleep well, you live well.
Joe De Sena here, CEO, founder of Spartan, host of the Hard Way podcast. Got a buddy of mine, Chitra Nawbatt. She's from Canada, and she is tough as nails. She's a code breaker. The CIA has tried to get their hands on her. I just wrote a book. What's the name of the book?
The CodeBreaker Mindset, Joe. And thank you for having me. And hello to your global audience. I'm so happy, thrilled to be here.
Thanks for coming. I guess we could all make better decisions. Is that really the impetus of how you think about life?
Indeed. And actually one thing is I'm actually originally from the Caribbean, Northeast coast of South America. That's where I was born, grew up in Toronto, happily living here in the United States. So a citizen to more than one country and grateful for that. And that informs decision-making, is that varied background. And I think that when it comes to professional judgment decision-making, there's three things. Number one, do you have the right information? Number two, even if you have the information, do you know how to read it? And oftentimes we don't know how to interpret that information, or we take things at face value. And especially today, things are less about face value, less about the surface. And three, a pattern recognition on how to read that information, process, and inform your decision-making. So that's the reason I wrote the CodeBreaker Mindset, is to give people this professional judgment decision-making framework, otherwise known as helping people understand how to formulate pattern recognition. There's always the written rules, but more importantly, the unwritten rules. And the unwritten rules is that data set that people don't tell you about. What does it really take to succeed in that intersection, or with that person, or with that problem construct, right? What does it really take to succeed from an IQ point of view, from an EQ point of view, from a holistic quotient point of view? I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I think though, fast forward that you're in the world of work, right? And I think it depends on, this sort of notion of concentration, right? So it's not to say that I didn't learn some of those skills. I think though it wasn't as conscious for me, and we all learn differently. And I would say maybe two things. Some of that I didn't learn, some I did learn, but, coming from the Caribbean, my mom and dad were more about, study, the merit, etc., right? But also too in school, when you think about how you're rewarded in school, that stuff may not have processed as strongly in my formation into adulthood. So
like when I think about it, there's lots of very intelligent people that create great products, but they can't sell them.
100%. And to your point around tying it together about being a good parent, if you break it down to its essence, understanding the other person. How do you reach that other person? How do you motivate that other person? So whether it's a parent to a child, how do you understand the constitution construction of your child and what's best for him or her to help nurture them into being the best human that they can be? If you've got a client, if you've got a teammate, if you've got a colleague, and even if your colleague or client or teammate is behaving in a way that might not be the most, whether it's ethical or good intention, how do you still figure out how to navigate that person and win over, quote unquote, win over that stakeholder? And some people are more motivated around the EQ, or what's the incentive to get them going. And it's really spending time studying and understanding that. One of the things I talk about in the book is building your relationship ecosystem to create network effect.
What you're trying to do with the book is short circuit that process a little bit and make people aware that these are skills you need to hone in on, because they're just as important as addition, subtraction, division.
And I think part of it is, and that's why I came up with this anchor framework in the book, the CodeBreaker Mindset equation, right? Which is about And it's an equation. It's actually a mathematical equation. And I guess that goes back to my accounting mathematical heritage, right? Written plus unwritten rules in brackets, right? Sort of times the pivots. There's going to be an unlimited number of pivots in our life. And do you understand the information to pivot yourself, which is a voluntary pivot, before an involuntary pivot? An involuntary pivot is some external force. That external force could be a health issue. It could be grief. It could be losing your job. It could be whatever is a lost relationship, whatever is that external pivot, that external force that forces your pivot. And there's always going to be nonlinearity in everybody's journey, whether in your personal life, your career life, or as part of a team environment or business building, investing. There's always going to be nonlinearity, which is comprised of serendipity and informed intuition. And I define informed intuition as your raw intuition you're born with, plus your life-to-date pattern recognition. And serendipity, people often talk about, I was at the right place at the right time. But it's a little bit more than that, right? Right place at the right time. Were you prepared to spot the opportunity? Was there energy alignment with that other person? And where does your intuition come in? So it's giving people this framework to help them understand and process what they're seeing, how to discern, how to analyze, and let that inform how they make decisions. I think people will still have to go through their own self-realization process, their own journey process, but can this help accelerate, okay, am I accessing and getting the right information? Am I reading this right? Am I tapping into my intuition? Am I even spotting serendipity to help me in my journey and help mitigate, either help accelerate or mitigate some of those headwinds that each human is inevitably going to face?
You know, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, I've got a lot of really smart friends who think I'm a nutcase because I take all the meetings I take all the phone calls I take, but maybe that's part of my data gathering process. Maybe by being out there so much and talking to so many people, having this conversation with you, I'm just gathering data to help inform my decisions.
And I think part of that also too is the more diverse your ecosystem of information, whether it comes to your point, you're having numerous meetings with people. So you're learning about different people's personality persona types. They could be from a different industry, subject matter expertise, life experience, professional experience, whatever it is. That all is informing your brain, your body, top to bottom, conscious, subconscious, and informing your pattern recognition or this notion of pattern recognition without you even knowing it.
I was thinking, what's the toughest decision you've ever made?
There's two buckets to that. There's a personal one and a professional one. And the personal one, I'll start with the personal one because it happened earlier in my journey. And this is not something I've ever talked about, but one of the things, Joe, and I appreciate about your podcast and discussions you have with people is really kind of getting to that core honesty, truth, grit in the person. And so for me, it was an unfortunate personal experience earlier in my adulthood, which is I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And so I have an ex-husband, very abusive situation. And that was a significant personal life pivot, right? Because in situations like that, and that was very new to me, didn't have the pattern recognition, quote unquote, if you will, on spotting that type of behavior and that type of thing. I'm in this marriage, things go south pretty quickly. Do you stay in that, right? And coming from the Caribbean, South America, where I'm from, there's, a bunch of cultural expectation, right? And at that time, divorce wasn't quote unquote popular. So there's a social consequence to that. Less about the economic consequence of getting out of that situation. I'd move countries, I'd move cities. I'd changed so much of my life for that person. I viewed it as short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. So you're making significant life, career, personal decisions. Now what do? Do you stay in that? Do you not stay in that? Very difficult for you to go deep in yourself. And I didn't have a lot of support where I was living at the time. Didn't have a lot of support. So that was a critical personal life pivot, which inevitably changed the trajectory of my life. Because at that time I was working at EY. I thought, hey, you'd be married, you'd have some kids. I thought about adopting kids as well. And you'd have this linear career at EY, become a partner, do wonderful things. That changed my entire life. And on the professional front, when I was fortunate enough to get out of that situation with the help of, my parents, especially my dad, came and did an intervention and the whole thing. It was a very dramatic situation. I then could have continued on at EY, but I wanted a complete change of environment. And then I pivoted and went into banking. So a personal life pivot also motivated me to want to sort of refresh, phoenix rising from the sun, the phoenix rising from the sun, or whatever that phrase is, type of thing.
Yeah, from the ashes.
From the ashes, and wanting to just have a complete change of scenery. And part of that was changing also, not continuing on at EY. And there's nothing wrong with that. They were supportive, but a new career.
It's interesting. You're choosing the word, and it sounds like you use it a lot in the book. And I love the word pivot, as opposed to quit. Right? I think that's what happens to a lot of us. Is I think we are all seeking the path of least resistance all day, every day. Right? Our brain is wired for that. And for you tell me if I'm wrong, the path of least resistance was to just stay in that situation. And you could start convincing yourself to stay in that situation, like we all do, because it's just too hard to and I'd be quitting, and I'm not a quitter, right? Like, you can create this narrative in your head and then make the wrong decision.
But I think exactly on that point, fear of quitting, path of least resistance, totally agree. And path of least resistance for whatever reason, right? Hey, this is comfortable, and not only just a situation of domestic violence. I'm not trying to sort of simplify or minimize that situation, but in any issue a person is facing. Path of least resistance because it's safe. It's easier maybe financially, or so you might think, right? It's easier in terms of the level of effort, mental fortitude, emotional fortitude. But there's also another element, which is fear of the unknown. In that situation, there's also a big fear of the unknown. How am I going to be viewed? Will I find another life partner? Will I be able to put myself back together? Am I going to work on myself? But then fast forward, when I left, the big career pivot for me was when I left investment banking to choose to break into journalism, because I wanted to dedicate a portion of my life to helping serve others through information, giving people good information. And when I made that career pivot, going from investment banking to becoming a TV news anchor in the #1 media market in the world, New York, everyone thought I was making the worst decision of my life, the worst decision financially, career-wise. Why do you want to do that? And by the way, you can't do that. You can't get a job in New York City, #1 media market, get one of 30 jobs. Definitely that was not a path of least resistance. That was being unemployed, making no money, not having a network, believing in yourself, all those things, everything of what you just said, that is opposite to the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is status quo. One of the things I talk about in the book, I have a chapter dedicated to this, is status quo is not your friend. Whatever that status quo is. Let's say you have a poor health condition, right? Or you're a diabetic or whatever, not looking after yourself. So status quo is continuing to not eat and do the things you need to do, or visiting the doctor, right?
Status quo is easiest. I mean, that we say it, we use different terminology, but stay in your comfort zone.
Stay in your comfort zone, because everything else takes effort. And not only does it take effort, it's the fear of, what if I don't succeed, quote unquote, however you define success? What if I fail? What do other people think, right? And I think for me, what I had to come to terms with in my own journey is it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, right? No one is putting food on, at least in my case, no one's putting food on my table, paying my bills. They're not going to be there at the end of life when you look back, or you're going to meet your maker, God, the universe, whatever it is you may believe in, or if you don't believe in those things, believing in yourself, right? And so it's these artificial constructs that put artificial ceilings on our life, worried about what other people think, other people's definitions of success. And I think that what I've had to learn is there's no such thing as quote unquote failure. It's trial and error learning. And maybe you might quote unquote succeed by your definition. Maybe you might fall a little bit short, but the victory is in trying. The victory is in taking that little step. That victory is in, it's the little moments, not even about the big moments. That's victory too. But the biggest victory, especially as you get older and all the pressures we all face, is the little moment.
The best analogy I can come up with is, I've never checked the weather once in my life. I go outside no matter what, rain, snow, right? And I think that's what just to put a fine point on it, the path of least resistance, the status quo, is stay inside. It's comfortable. But I can't think of one time where I've gone outside, snow, rain, hurricane, where it hasn't been awesome, right? You just feel alive. And so however you define it, I think we all need to get outside. We certainly need to actually get outside more and get more sunlight, but we just need to get out of our comfort zone more. Give me an example of your best decision using this framework? What's your best decision? You're like, I guess you're probably going to tell me that pivot, right?
There's a couple of best decisions, but definitely not staying in an abusive marriage. So that was an important decision. I think though, probably the greatest sort of risk reward decision was that pivot into journalism, right? Because of the, career consequence and even before the career consequence, right? The long shot, like that was, Joe, that was like a significant long shot, trying to get one out of like 30 to 40 jobs in New York City, national number one media market. Like that was such a long shot, right? And so putting all on the line, and I tell you, I still have memories of literally, down on my knees, floor of my apartment in New York City. I do believe in God and the universe, right? And the magical forces that can help you along your way, saying, surrendering, right? If this is what I'm supposed to do, I don't have a network in this. I don't know anybody. Everyone in the world is against me on this. Literally only 5 people were encouraging and supportive, and not 5 people who could make decisions to help me, but they were encouraging, which I was grateful for. But if this is what I'm supposed to do, please show me the way. Please help me figure it out. And I have to tell you, when I think about the holistic of my career, EY, banking, being on television, then going into digital transformation consulting, then being an investment partner at a large, well-known venture capital firm, then working in tech and startups, all of that. There's a phrase that you can't connect the dots of your life forward, you can only connect it back. And that pivot was the most significant decision, because what I said to God and the universe of the world, and more importantly, what I said to myself, is I believe in myself. I can make it happen. And in making it happen, it helped me understand that I could do it again. Whatever it is I'm trying to do, whether, someone, thwarts what I'm trying to do, whether you, quote unquote, have a misstep in business, career, whatever it is. In other words, your ability to recover and keep going. So I learned that definitely coming out of the domestic violence situation, that I could recover, build back myself, keep going from making that career pivot. And then subsequent pivots, career-wise, business building-wise, that, you're knocked out, you can get back up. And one of the things I talk about, which is why I have 2 chapters in the book dedicated to the voluntary and the involuntary pivots, and to your point about not checking the weather, I think when you're a child and in your formative years, teenage into adulthood, undergrad, graduate school, whatever it is you may choose to do, I don't think it's trained in us that there's going to be all these pivots and you've got to get back up. I grew up playing sports. I grew up playing rugby, soccer, skating, right? And when you fall down, your coach is like, get back up, get back up. And so that was there to a certain extent. But when you get into adulthood, I didn't think I'd have that much fall down, get back up from a career point of view or from a life point of view, right? And so part of, I think, is the opportunity for people and through this book and to learn earlier is, it's going to rain. You know what? I can deal with that. It's going to hurricane. I can deal with that. Some days are going to be sunny. Some days I'm going to forget my umbrella. But you know what? You've got the fortitude. You can go deep into yourself. It's like squeezing the toothpaste, right? You squeeze the toothpaste, you think you're at the end of the toothpaste. There's nothing there. You keep squeezing a little bit and you eke out just a little bit more. And I think that's the human condition. You can eke out to get through the next thing.
Good. I mean, you're singing our song. I mean, you're using the word pivot. We use the word obstacles. Like, I love pivot because you could say quit, right? Or you could and pivot is just such a more powerful word. It's a great word. Give me 3 things that everybody should be doing, simple things every day to level up their life based on your framework.
The first thing is positive self. I think that's actually a really hard thing to do. And I'm sure many of us have, whichever thought leadership that you've tapped into, right? Around, whether it's the champion pose, whether it's saying today's going to be a great day, that positive thinking, right? But I think that the biggest person you're battling, and you've talked about this in some of your shows, Joe, the biggest person you're battling is yourself. It's yourself. You might wake up, you might not feel great. You might feel like you don't want to do this. You don't want to work out. You don't want to deal with that person you've got to deal with at the job, or, hey, you've got to go take a risk or whatever it is, right? And so there's a lot of headwinds and barriers coming our way on a daily basis. And a lot of those barriers come from you and your own negative voice. So I think the one biggest thing, and maybe that's number 1, 2, and 3, but the one biggest thing is that continuous positive self-talk. And when you see yourself going into negative talk or negative mindset, how do you bring yourself back? It's very difficult to do. And I think people make it seem, or at least in my experience, people make it seem like it's very easy to do, but it's actually very difficult. So how do you stop yourself and say something that's positive, reaffirming? Now, for me, and I'll use this example. So first, it's that positive self-talk. Second and third, it's that positive self-talk too, because that's also the root to getting you to try something different. You have an idea, to your point around path of least resistance. Okay, well, how do you try not the path of least resistance? How do you try something new? How do you pick up the phone and cold call that person, warm call that person, reach out to somebody that you didn't talk to 5 or 10 years ago? You're in a new networking event, right? You're at a conference or you're out on the street, you see somebody, you're afraid to say hello. Let me make that hello. Let me make that little step. But to make that little step, it's got to come from that place of positive self-talk. And that's part of your preparation process. Because one of the things I talk about around serendipity is, are you prepared? Are you prepared in business? Are you prepared to engage with that person? Are you prepared to engage with your child?
I'm good, I guess, would be the positive self-talk. I get to do this would be the thank you, right? No matter what you're doing, like I get to do this as opposed to I have to do this.
Joe, there have been times in my life, especially when my dad died, right? It was so dramatic and traumatic for me, right? And so for me, and grief is a very real thing for people. And by the way, grief can come in so many forms, right? Grief is a lost friendship, losing a loved one. Grief could be losing a career opportunity or a missed entrepreneurship opportunity. Grief is a thing that happens to all of us, whether we fully use that word or not, right? And there's moments in my life where I couldn't even say to myself, I'm good, or I can. But the thing that I could say was, thank you, right? At least for me, that was the path of least resistance phrase for me.
And I'm visualizing a t-shirt that just says thank you.
And that was the
Right.
lowest path of, that was the absolute path of least resistance of what I could muster out was thank you.
You're grateful. You're grateful. It's gratitude, and gratitude is powerful. They say to me, "How was your flight, Joe?" I say, "Well, it landed. It didn't have to land, right? Like, how's your day? I'm alive. What's next?"
Helping people through getting this information out there. My biggest goal for writing the CodeBreaker Mindset was just, when I say desperately wanting to help people, helping people the way that I felt that I wasn't helped. A lot of headwinds. I'm here standing after, and I'm grateful to be standing with you after a lot of headwinds. And it's really helping people, because what I find is there's a lot of noise, a lot of external voices and noise, and your own internal voice, but a lot of external voices, people telling you, no, you can't. And I do believe, and I have a chapter in the book about this force of nature. Every human, and I've learned this from you in some of your shows, and nobody can put a ceiling on your life unless you allow them. So the reason I wrote this book is to say to a person, you're a force of nature. You've got a beautiful superpower, beautiful possibilities. Help people live their fullest life. Because for me, coming out of the death of my father, there was a time when the grief was so intense. And I got to a place after the grief dissipated that I felt tired of feeling sad, and I just wanted to live in creation. And for me, that's helping others live in creation, live in positivity, live and push through the headwinds, eliminate the ceilings. I'm not saying it's easy, but you're a force in nature. Don't let the external folks stop your force in nature. Live your best life. And that's not to sound theoretical. It's giving people this thought leadership to say that every human needs somebody in their corner. I'm in your corner. You can do this. Whatever it is.
How do people find you?
www.chitranawbatt.com. That's where to find me. And you can get information there on the CodeBreaker Mindset book. Proceeds go to cancer research and loving memory of my father, for all those affected. And also the podcast is there as well, www.chitranawbatt.com. And on social media, whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, all that good stuff, the same handle @Chitra Nawbatt, ChitranAwbatt, all one word.